Today, we will be talking about ethnic conflict. So, let me start. The end of the 20th century was marked by a number of serious crises and serious conflicts. Oh, by the way, sorry guys, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them during my lecture, but if you, or you can write down them in chat. So, but I think that the best way would be that I answer after my lecture, after my presentation, if you don't mind. Okay, so the end of the 20th century was marked by a number of serious crises, of course, and due to collapse of the bipolar system, due to disintegration of the um, world international order, and these crises were superimposed on each other, and this crisis increase the tension in a world politics. But you need to take into account that the number of international conflicts, if we compare, for example, 1989 and 1995, the number of major international armed conflicts had been decreasing. At the same time, the main problem was the problem connected with ethnic conflicts, the problem connected with civil wars inside of the society, inside of the state. This is one of the main challenge and one of the main problem, not only at the end of the 20th century, but it is one of the main problem today in many countries. And today we will be talking about, we will try to answer the question, why some of the conflicts that can be armed, but they are not armed, why some of the conflicts end with violence and with war, and other conflicts, they end up and they are finished by peaceful means. What are the reasons? What are the reasons why conflicts can be converted into violence, into armed resistance? So, at the same time, today I already told you that ethnic conflict is one of the most serious threats to humanity, and I can I can mention some of the reasons, and here is the list of these reasons. First of all, the erosion of the Westphalian system. Today, of course, and you would probably agree with me, we are witnessing the erosion of Westphalian system that is existed more than 350 years. And some of researchers today said that we do not have today bipolar world. We do not have today multipolar world. We have what we have today on international arena is just chaos. Um, Another reason why ethnic conflict is one of the main threats to humanity is the process of globalization, because national boundaries are becoming, of course, more transparent. The quantity of actors and the on international arena, in international relations, are increasing. Just 50 years ago, we had states in international relations, and we had um, uh, organizations, international organizations, governmental, non-governmental, it doesn't matter. But what we have today with the process of globalization, who can participate in international relations? Religious groups, a political leader, a person, just an ordinary person, uh, transnational companies, and so on and so forth. These impact a lot the international relations. This makes the conflicts in general and ethnic conflicts are very, very difficult to handle, are very, very difficult to resolve. At the same time, the parallel process of globalization that takes place today is the autonomization of regions. Uh, why? And this parallel process, they are they are in contradiction with each other. At the same time, this makes also difficult to handle the conflicts. And identity formation today is not only on the state basis, but it can be on different bases like the ethnic, the linguistic, the religious. If you ask a person from Europe, where are you from? She or he can answer, I'm from the European Union, or I'm from Bordeaux, or I'm from, for example, Catalonia, and so on and so forth. So many people do not identify themselves with the state. They can identify themselves with on ethnic basics, on ethnic roots, linguistic, and so on. At the same time, modern conflicts, they're almost all domestic conflicts, and they are called conflicts of identity. And they're characterized by poor handling, by many actors, many participants, and at the same time, the weakness of the central government. If we, for example, take Catalonian Spanish conflict, we can say that the central government is trying to solve this conflict, is trying to do something, but it's very, very difficult and challenging process. And the end of the Cold War, the end of the 20th century was characterized by another crisis, restructuring of the international system, the disappearance of bipolar world, the emergence of new elites, the emergence of new states, the emergence of new actors in international relations also influenced ethnic conflicts. So these are the reasons why ethnic conflicts today is one of the most serious threats to humanity. And I hope that you agree with me. At the same time, the disappearance of the bipolar world are characterized by local conflicts when they live their own life without any control. So if we say that during the existence of USSR, during the existence of bipolar world, we had just two polars. So we had the USA and the USSR, and all other states were going around these two polars. And that's why it was very easy to solve conflict, not very easy, but much more easier than today. So only two superpowers needed to negotiate, needed to find to start mediation process, and conflict would be resolved. But today we had a lot of polars, we had a lot of really strong states, and it's really difficult to negotiate with so many actors. So, but conflicts, frankly speaking, it's even ethnic conflicts. It's very. It's not a difficulty. It's not a. It's a normal category of international relations, of world politics. So during the history of humanity, so we have been having a lot of conflicts, and the main problem, I think, and the main question that should be answered, how and in what form armed or peaceful conflicts can be resolved. So why some conflicts escalate into armed violence, and other conflicts, they are ended up by peaceful means. So that is the question. So knowing the reason to this knowing the answer to this question, so you can work on conflict. You can try to prevent the most dangerous way of their resolution. I mean, war. So, and today we will try to answer the following question. So, why some conflicts and by peaceful means and other turned into war? And in this research, we would identify two groups of factors in conflict. Structural factor, I will explain what does it mean, and procedural factors. And we would take three regions and two countries in each region. So these are Western Europe, we will be talking about Belgium and Northern Ireland. Central Europe, we will be talking about Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, and Russia, we will be talking about Tatarstan and Chechnya. So, and as you can see, in Western Europe, probably you have never heard about conflict in Belgium, but it took place there. So in Belgium, the ethnic conflicts ended up by peaceful means. In Northern Ireland, you know, Ulster crisis and so on, and bombing of the capital of Northern Ireland. So the conflict in Northern Ireland ended with armed confrontation and with terroristic attacks. In Central Europe, in Czechoslovakia, the split of this country into Czech Republic and Slovakia took place in 19th, and also this ethnic conflict ended up by peacefully. And in Yugoslavia, everybody knows what was going on there. It's really, really um, serious and terrible armed confrontation. And Russia, Tatarstan, and Chechnya, we would try to answer why conflict in Tatarstan was finished with peacefully, and in Chechnya we had war. So, and in order to understand and to answer this question, just above mentioned question, we would be talking about structural and procedural factors. What are structural factors and what are procedural factors? So structural factors that we're gonna analyze today, or independent factors or variables. So these are the present these factors, they are stable, and it's really, really difficult to change them. And if you want to change them, you need time, not just 1 year, just several years, or maybe 100 years. And these are the existence of different ethnic groups. So the existence of different ethnic groups in a country. This is one of the main structural factors. Um, the more different ethnic groups exist in a country, the most dangerous way can conflict, in a most dangerous way can conflict go in this conflict. So regional differences and the high level of centralization of the country. What does it mean? So the presence of regions that are different in many aspects, but mainly in economic aspect, in religious aspect, in cultural aspect, in social, in ethnic aspect. So if we have in a country just we have different regions, and they're different on many basics. So the possibility of ethnic conflict is very, very high. So then significant social and political change, emergence of new political and economic elites. What does it mean? It means when we when the life goes on and we don't have any changes, any vulnerable events, and so on. So the ethnic conflicts can just sleep. And when we have social, political change, when we have when we witness emergence of new political or economic elites, the conflict can just blow on the basics of these changes. So the next structural factor that we're going to discuss today is weak institutions for resolving conflicts and poor legal system. So weak institutions, weak mechanisms that can ensure the management, that can ensure the resolution of the conflict, the poor development of the legal system, the poor development of the mediation mechanisms, the poor development of, for example, conciliation commissions, and so on. So if we witness the lack of institutions that can help to solve the problems, that can help to negotiate to the parties of the conflict. So this also influence the conflict. And the last structural factor is the lack of culture of consent in the society. So that can be values, that can be traditions, that can be something that is aimed at a peaceful solving of a problem. The lack of the culture of consent. So, and these structural factors. So let me analyze the existence of these structural factors in above mentioned conflicts. I remind you, we will be talking about Western Europe, Central Europe, and Russia. So, and we're going to analyze these factors and how they influence the ethnic conflict. So, in all countries that are the objects of our analysis, we can detect the presence of the first two structural factors. I mean this one, different ethnic groups and regional differences and high level of centralization of the country. So, Great Britain, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Russia, these are countries that are not uniform, that are not unified in the ethnic and religious sense. You know that in Great Britain we have Northern Ireland. They are different from British people. They have different traditions. They have different religion. They have different cultural consent and so on in Great Britain. What we have in Belgium, Belgium is divided into two parts. We have Wallonia on the south, and we have Flanders on north, and these ethnic groups, they are also not they are also differ on the basis of cultural, language, and so on. What we have in Czechoslovakia, we have Czech people, Slovak people. They are, of course, in different religion, in ethnic and religion sense, they are different. And in Russia, of course, you know that we have a bunch of ethnic groups. We have a lot of religions here. So all these this structural factor, I mean the first one, the existence of different ethnic groups, so we can see it in all our cases. The second structural factor is the centralization of the power. So in all our cases, we can see the inherent centralization of the power. It doesn't matter what country is. I mean, unitary character of the state, such as the United Kingdom, Belgium, or just Russia, when we didn't have real reforms devoted to eliminate the ethnic differences. So this structural factor also plays an important role, played an important and plays an important role in all our cases. But the degree of centralization of the states was not the same in our cases. But we witness centralization of power. So this is their map of Czechoslovakia, and this country was divided into two parts. And this is, okay, I tell you now, this is, to my mind, their one of the best examples of the division of the country, one of the best examples of negotiations of division of the country. When at the beginning of 1990s, the one parliament of one state, the parliament of Czechoslovakia, sit on the round table, Czech people and Slovak people, and negotiate how they would like to split the country, how they would create new states, new countries. And it was about 30 agreements were signed by within these negotiations, how to divide industry, how to divide financial system, and so on and so forth. So it was done by peaceful means, first of all. And the second point is that it was done by the parliament of the country, not by the religious groups, not by the terrorists, not by new parliament of Czech Republic or Slovakia, by unified parliament. So it is very, very um, good example how to divide country if, for example, people feel that they cannot live together anymore. So the third factor, the factor of economic differentiation, the factor of economic differences. So the factor, the influence, or sorry, the influence of this factor was seen differently in Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, and in Tatarstan and Chechnya. So in all these cases, at the end of 80s, at the beginning of 90s, the process, the growth of separatism took place. But in Yugoslavia and Russia, for independence was and voted the leaders of developed and resource-rich regions. So in Yugoslavia and in Czechoslovakia. In Yugoslavia, it was Slovenia and Croatia, and in Russia, it was Chechnya and Tatarstan. In Czechoslovakia, for independence, voted less economically developed part of the country, Slovakia. Why? Because Slovak people, they it's mainly agricultural country, and the Slovak people, they didn't want to rush into the market reforms and market economy. They wanted state, their own state, to help them to convert their economy, to start their own new way of living and standards. But the Czech people, they wanted like really, really fast reforms, and they were ready to start market economy. That's why Slovakia was firstly for independence, because they want that their state would take care of the society. In Northern Ireland, in economic terms, it is also Northern Ireland. It's not the strongest, not the richest region of the United Kingdom. But unlike in the former Czechoslovakia, so in Northern Ireland, the armed conflict had been developing. Why? We will see. So another structural factor, the presence of significant social and political change and the emergence of new political and economic elites. So what we have in Northern Ireland. So in Northern Ireland, we have, from one hand, we have Protestant settlers, and we had unionists. From another hand, we have Catholics, the indigenous people, and then the nationalists. So when Irish people took the possibility and used, especially the terrorist groups, they used the possibility to sharpen the conflict, to make the conflict, to convert the conflict into armed resistance. So, and the split was on the basics of religions, on the basics of their uh, their relations with the state and so on. In Belgium, so in Belgium, the ethnic differentiation manifested in the creation of the national parties. So we had in the poor south, Wallonia was against autonomy, and rich north, Flanders, they were for autonomy. They wanted to be independent, but at the same time, in Belgium, we had a number of companies who wanted to protect their interests, and mainly these companies were Flemish. In Chechnya and Tatarstan, so we were witnessing also the growth of separatism, the emergence of the existence of new political, mainly political and economic elites. And in Tatarstan, the nationalist party called Itifak was created. But in Belgium, the first reforms, when they wanted to try to fix, firstly, the linguistic borders, uh, took place in 60s. And after these reforms, they had protests in 1966, from 1966 to 1968. And these reforms, the linguistic reforms, were followed by the protests. The presence of significant social and political change also reflects in the following. In Belgium, reforms were, the aim of the reforms was to decentralize the state, and but the conflict is known as peaceful conflict. In Tatarstan, they had similar process. They were, they signed the agreement, they signed the contract with Moscow in 1994. They signed an agreement with the Moscow Russian government and the leadership of Tatarstan. And in this case, the Moscow government decided to share, decided to give some autonomy, and decided to give some power to the local level. In Czechoslovakia, we just had quick talks on the division of the state. I have already mentioned this, and in Chechnya, we had similar process. But in Chechnya, another group of factors played one of the most important role in the conflict. Procedural factors. This is the role of the political leader and the policy of the region. So I would tell you now that in Chechnya, the role of the political leader was huge in the conflict. So, I'm sorry. So here is the territory of Belgium. So this is Flanders and Wallonia. So the poor Wallonia, they do not want to, they didn't vote for independence, but Flanders, they wanted to be independent because it is a rich part of Belgium. But please take into account, so for example, in different countries, the way and the actors who want to split the country, who want to be independent, they are different. We just now just mentioned these factors, how it was going on in our cases. But the most important role play not the procedural, not the structural factors, but the procedural ones. And I will explain you how do they play this important role. So the next procedural structural factor and is the presence of the developed democratic institution and mechanisms that can help to negotiate, that can help to solve the problem. So Catholic in Northern Ireland didn't have were not allowed to enter their government for a long period of time. In the former socialist countries, democratic institutions existed more on paper but not in real life. So, and in socialist countries, there was a lack of the developed democratic institutions that could help to solve problems and solve some conflicts and solve some issues. So, and in Northern Ireland, just Catholics just didn't have the opportunity to negotiate and didn't have the opportunity to solve the problem. So here is the map of Northern Ireland. Here's the map of, it's a part of the Great Britain. I am sure that you know it. And you can find the Ulster, where we had the armed resistance during the sharp period of the conflict in Northern Ireland. So we go on. In Northern Ireland, so the last structural factor is the presence of the developed democratic institutions and mechanisms. So in Northern Ireland, the high level of the culture of consent, the high level of harmony within each community is very, very well presented. But as for the relationship between different communities, the culture of consent, the culture of negotiations, the culture of solving conflicts by peaceful means due to the long-term division of the society is not very well developed. In Czechoslovakia, the lack of the serious conflicts between Czechs and between Slovaks in their history, because they didn't make war between themselves, between Czech and Slovak people. The impact of European democratic institutions play, in this case, in the case with Czechoslovakia's case, play important role. In Chechnya, in Tatarstan, please take into account that the modern area of Tatarstan was annexed by Russia in the 16th century, and this area, the people in this area wanted to be under the Russian umbrella, let's say. They wanted to under Russian protection. And Chechnya became a part of Russia only in 19th century after a stubborn resistance of Chechen people. They didn't want to be the part of Russia. They wanted to be independent, but we cannot change the history. So the history moment, the existence of democratic institutions and play one of the most important role in as for structural factors. So here is the map of Chechnya. Here you can see today's map and today's part of Russia. So, and here is Tatarstan on the north or on the south of Russia. That became part of Russian Federation, of Russia in 16th century. So, the impact of structural factors on the development of peaceful or armed conflict. So, summing up the review of the impact of structural factors on the development of the conflict. So I want to say that the existence of structural factors is the necessary condition for the development of the conflict situation. But at the same time, please take into account that it doesn't determine the form of its solution. The more structural factors we do have in ethnic conflicts, the more difficult will be to resolve the conflict situation. But not all factors are needed for the conflict. At the same time, the stronger the impact of each of the factors, the more critical is the conflict situation and more it tends to escalate to violence, to violent means of resolution of the conflict. So please take into account that the existence of structural factor is a necessary element of the development of conflict situation. For example, in ethnic conflicts can exist only one structural factor, and conflict can just be solved very, very easy and very, very fast. But we can have, I mentioned only 6 structural factors, but you can imagine that much more structural factors that can impact the conflict situation. Now we're gonna move to another group of factors, procedural factors, that also influence very, very seriously the ethnic conflicts and also influence and determine how conflict would be resolved by peaceful means or with violence. So what are procedural factors? So procedural factors are policies pursued by both parties of the conflict, and procedural factors also third parties that can, or third party that can participate in the conflict. So procedural factors is the role of a political leader who can say, so let's withdraw troops from Northern Ireland, or who would say, I want a Chechen Republic be independent. So the role of the political leader is very, very, and at the same time, the political leader is also at its policy, his policy or her, it's also procedural factor. So the role of the procedural factors is very, very important. So why it is more difficult to analyze procedural factors than the structural ones? First of all, different policies may lead to the same results. I would like to give you an example. The Soviet Union and the South Africa during apartheid regime. So in USSR, the USSR policy was aimed to erosion of ethnic differences and the creation of the new historical community, new society, so-called Soviet people. So we didn't have any nationalities in during the existence of the USSR. We had just one unified community called Soviet people. So there was no ethnic differences, and the creation of the society was on ideological basis. What did we have in South Africa during apartheid regime? So in the policy in South Africa was aimed at preservation and enhancement of the differences based on race. They were trying to create heterogeneous society. But so we see that in USSR and in South Africa, we have different policies, but these policies lead to the same results. The result, sharp intensification of national and racial differences, of national, religious, linguistic differences, and so on. So that is why it's very difficult to analyze, more difficult than structural factors, to analyze procedural factors. And the second issue is that the process of political decision making is subject to various different poorly calculable influence, because the political decision making can take just a couple of seconds, couple of minutes, and it's really, really difficult to follow the and to analyze the decision making process if we talk about a political leader. So, but at the same time, parties in conflict may act unilaterally, or they can coordinate their decisions and their actions with each other. And the focus on the joint or unilateral actions, the focus on uh, culture of negotiation, or the focus of independent actions, can be the basic of the analysis of procedural factors. So we're going to analyze procedural factors in our 6 cases, and we're going to analyze how political leaders acted. So what actions did they use, joint or unilateral? So in all our analyzed situations, before the emergence of the conflict, there was policy aimed to the assimilation of ethnic minorities, forcing their other national language and traditions, strengthening one ethnic group or one religious group as opposite to the other. And in all our cases, before the emergence of the conflict, parties wanted to act unilaterally. Parties wanted to restore their roots. Parties wanted to build it, to strengthen their national identity. So they wanted to be independent. But in the conflicts that was resolved peacefully, unilateral actions were not the dominant in political action. For example, in Czechoslovakia, Czech and Slovak parties moved on discussion how they be living in future and how to split the country. And the decision of the split of the country, on the disintegration of the country, was made, I already told you, by Czechoslovakian parliament, by the legal organ of one state. So Belgium, what we have in Belgium, so extreme views also we can found in Belgium case, but these views in Wallonia, these views in Flanders found no support among the political leaders, and they found no support among the most population of Belgium, in Wallonia or in Flanders or in Brussels. In Tatarstan, Tatar leaders took decided to find a balance of ethnic, political, religious interests, and they wanted to build the multicultural, the multi-ethnic, and multi-confessional society. And if some of you have been in Tatarstan, you can see that Tatarstan government, I think that they found this balance of multicultural society, multi-religious, multi-linguistic, and so on and so forth. So also in this case, in Tatarstan, the unilateral actions found no support among the political leaders. But unilateral actions were dominant in the armed conflicts. For example, in Yugoslav conflict, Serb population, in response to the restriction of their rights, as well as anti-Serb propaganda in March 1991, what did they do? They unilaterally declared Serbian autonomous region of Krajina within Croatia. So orientation to the unilateral actions was typical also in the case of Bosnia, because Bosnia declared independence in the absence of Serb deputies in the parliament. Oh, so in the case of Yugoslavian conflict, so we also can see that unilateral actions they prevailed. What did we have in Chechen conflict? So in Chechen conflict, at the end of the 1990s, the first Chechen National Congress elected the executive committee, and the executive committee decided to create the independent Chechen state. And the first Chechen leader, here is his picture, his name is Jahar Dudayev. He said that we want to create independent republic of Ichkeria, and we do not need any negotiations, and we do not need any help, any support from central government, I mean from Moscow. So, and the amount of unilateral actions in the case of Chechen conflict just prevailed. It was the much more than the joint actions. At the beginning of the conflict, not only the Chechen leader behaved unilaterally, but also federal authorities, central government, they also behaved unilaterally. They didn't want to negotiate, and there was you still can read if you check the newspapers of that time. Here is the citation. Moscow tried not to talk about Chechnya as if it didn't exist. So at the beginning of the conflict, Moscow just tried not to pay attention to this conflict. And this is also the example of unilateral behavior. So in Northern Ireland, at some stage of the conflict, central government tried to move to the economic development and to move to the dialogue, to develop programs in Northern Ireland that could help to overcome the economic backwardness, the bad economic development of Northern Ireland. And they were trying to fight against unemployment in Northern Ireland and so on. But not all these programs were implemented in Northern Ireland, and the local government also didn't want much help from from London, because they want to get more and more autonomy. So, and one of the most, I already told you, important, one of the most important procedural factor is the individuality of political leader, of the politician, and the role of the politician is very, very important when we talk about procedural factors. So, the Chechen conflict, the personal factor played very, very important role in this case. Jahar Dudayev, the first Chechen leader who wanted to create the independent republic of Ichkeria, from the very beginning, he took a tough stance, declaring an independent state, demanding the withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory of Chechnya. Jahar Dudayev, the Chechen leader, he didn't want any presence of Moscow on the Chechen territory. And he was a military guy, he was a military person, and he was very, very severe and very, very stable as for independence of Chechnya. So as you can see, the procedural factors, the policy making process, the role of politician is very, very important. If we move to the development of the conflict, we can say that the unilateral and joint actions of the parties are always present during the development of the conflict. So we cannot see any conflict with just unilateral behavior or joint actions. So of course they exist both. At the same time, the analysis of the results of ethnic conflict suggests that in the case of the armed conflict, the development and the unilateral actions, they prevail, they are predominant. But this statement needs further confirmation. What exactly determines the orientation of the participants on the joint or unilateral actions? So it's not easy to say, but in the situation of Chechnya and Tatarstan, personal factor played the most important role, the essential role. So what about the phases of the conflict? How do they impact the conflict, the procedural and the structural factors? So structural factors determine the development potential of the armed conflict. The more structural factors we have, so the more serious conflict we would witness. Structural factors is the necessary element of the first phase of conflict. Procedural factors contribute to the formation of the conflict threshold. So procedural factors, they also play an important role in the first phase of conflict, but not so important as their structural factors, because it was the structure, because the structural factors, they prevail in this situation. And the second phase, during the second phase, a special role is played mainly by procedural factors and the policy of the political leaders, the policy making process, the orientation of the political leaders to the unilateral or joint actions. How do they think? How do they want to overcome the conflict? How do they want to solve the problem? So during the second phase, during the sharp phase of the conflict, of course, play the most important role. Structural factors, they shape the conflict situation, and procedural factors, they determine the form of the solution of the conflict situation. So structural factors are more important during the first phase of the conflict, and during the second phase, when conflict parties are trying to find the way how to solve this conflict. So the procedural factors play the most important role. So the third phase of the conflict. The first phase of the conflict comes from the time when the culminating phase is over, when the conflict is solved, and it's all about the building peace. And here is structural and procedural factors. They're interrelated, and they also they also influence, they both influence the peace building, let's say, policy. So the structural factors, they, in the third phase of conflict, they can influence the peace building operations, peace building policy, in the sense that the history of the parties of the conflict and the history of the country plays an important role. The economic differentiation plays an important role. The existence of different ethnic groups plays an important role. And procedural factors, the policy of the political leader, also here is very, very important. So these factors is somehow interrelated. So here is I tried to analyze all these cases, not going deeper in details, because in this case I would need not 1 hour but much, much, much more time. But uh, I just want you to get the common sense and to get the understanding how you can analyze a conflict when you want to highlight, when you can highlight the uh, structural factors and the procedural factors, and analyze the stable variables of the society, of the country, and the policy making process. So thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure for me